It's 5 to 7. He looked to the heavens when he heard the engines hum. A sky full of planes and each one with a bomb. And they're gonna wanna drop them on someone.
Well, good evening and welcome to a special edition of Islands at War. No Nick today, it's Keith with you, along with local author Theresa Le Flem, who's going to talk to us about her sequel in a novel sequence. And welcome to you, Theresa. Thank you very much for coming in.
Hello, Keith, and thank you for inviting me.
Not at all, not at all. The books will be fantastic interest to our listeners. Now, I'd like to talk a little about the first novel in the sequence because, yes, you did come on and talk about it when that was newly published, but we're attracted very, very many more listeners to the podcast, and so they would have not necessarily be aware that there was a first novel in this sequence. So the first novel was called See a Barbed Wire, and can you set the scene for us, obviously without giving any spoilers?
Yes, Keith. The action takes place in the spring of 1942, and Ellen, the teenage daughter of the family, watches the prisoners being driven along the road by the German soldiers, and she feels very sorry for them. And that night, an escaped prisoner knocks on their back door, and he's bleeding and he's been beaten up. And she takes pity on him and pleads with her parents to take him in. And they end up taking him in and hiding him, which is extremely dangerous. If found out and betrayed, they could be shot or deported. So it becomes a very dangerous situation.
Yes, very, very dangerous situation. And the time frame of the book, and of course, at this point, the location is Guernsey within the Channel Islands. And the time frame of the whole sequel takes us from February 1942 to the end of 1942?
Yes, to the end, just before Christmas. Just before Christmas, without saying what happens. That's the time frame of the first book.
And of course, in the book, we have a rich variety of characters within the families, and of course, right across the community, the Guernsey community. And in the sequel, many of those characters we pick up with a little later, don't we?
Yes, we do.
And of course, we move forward 3 years to February 1945, and the sequel is called Freedom on the Morning Tide. And the thing about February 45 is that Vega ship has been bringing the Red Cross parcels in. Could you just give the listeners a little idea about SS Vega?
Yes, the islanders have been starving virtually, and the SS Vega was sent from Sweden, I believe, and it carries emergency supplies from the Red Cross, a box of food and essentials for every single member of the island. So it was actually a lifesaver, that ship arriving, and it came more than once. It came perhaps monthly for 3 months or 4.
Well, I happen to know because we looked into this in research for the podcast. It actually came 5 times.
5 times.
And the fifth and final time was actually at the end of May, after the liberations, because it still needed to continue to bring supplies in. And the interesting period that you've chosen for the commencement of Freedom in the Morning Tide is in February 1945. There was a great expectation here on the island that the war must finish soon. It really must finish soon because D-Day had been a success by February 1945. The Allies were making their way up through Europe. And so there was this huge mounting excitement, but also a lot of tension. And you've tapped into that tension, haven't you?
Yes, but the islanders weren't supposed to know what was going on in the world and in the war. But of course, there were the underground sort of news service who were finding out what was going on, and rumours spread quite rapidly that the Germans were failing terribly, and that they started to think that, gosh, the war we could be liberated soon, and they started to get excited. And that's when my character Ellie starts to get worried, and in the book Freedom on the Morning Tide, she's actually forgotten about. She hasn't forgotten about her prisoner, but she has been, through circumstances, she has become engaged to Robert, a very solid, very kind man who's a bank clerk, and she promises to have a decent, secure future with Robert. So she's agreed to marry him. But then she starts to think, supposing that Lucas does actually come back and remember me.
Lucas, obviously from the very first book.
Yes, Lucas, who is the prisoner who her family hid in the attic.
So we go into the sequel with, and it becomes evident within the sequel that Lucy has embarked on this new life, but really she's looking back, and there's a mounting tension within her because she's thinking, what if?
Yes, Ellie. Ellie is wearing the engagement ring, and in the book Freedom on the Morning Tide, I don't want to give too much away, but Lucas does eventually manage to find his way back, and it follows on after the war into 1946, when Lucas traces his family back in Poland and manages finally to get back to Guernsey. But there is so much tension in Guernsey and between communities. It's not an easy thing, really. There was, even when the war was over, there was a lot of regret, really. The island was damaged. Marriages had been broken sometimes. The children who were evacuated, when they returned, some of the parents didn't recognise them and they didn't recognise their parents. And some of them had forgotten how to speak patois, so they couldn't understand each other, which was very frustrating and upsetting.
Well, that's right. But I just want to draw you back to February 45, when and of course we move forward through February up towards the liberation, which of course was May the 9th, 1945. Yeah. And the characters are starting to come out of this depression and this mounting excitement. But yes, the excitement was tinged with a little bit of worry about people when they returned, how they may have changed, how the people here may have changed. And I know in my own family there was a lot of consideration. Well, the first consideration was, were people still alive? But the other consideration was, of course, marital fidelity. That figures largely in letters that I've inherited. Yeah. And so what I think that your book is, amongst other things, is very, very good at describing and understanding and presenting these tensions, because we also have Lucy, the character Lucy, that has, and I'll leave you to decide how much you want to talk about Lucy, but she's an interesting character as well, isn't she?
Yes, she is. She's blonde and a bit naive and a bit cheeky, and she has, in A Sea of Barbed Wire, she has an affair with a German soldier, and without giving too much away, she does become pregnant, which happened a lot on the island, actually. And in the second book, of course, she's very anxious because she's expecting her husband Peter, who was serving in the army and has actually been disabled in injuries. She's expecting Peter to come home, and he has no idea that she's got this little toddler girl called Frankie, who she's named after the German soldier Franz, who she loved. And so the anxiety of Peter coming home, meeting him off the ship when he comes, is quite a dramatic scene in the book.
Yes, well, the listeners to the podcast will be aware, of course, how Nick and I move through each month in the occupation and turn up these idiosyncrasies in the community that come about because of the pressure of the occupation on society and between the military and between civilians, and also between civilians amongst themselves. Yeah. And both of the books have got a very rich parade of characters, and one of the things I liked is that you've managed to continue that characterization of these characters, between the two books. Can I ask you as well, because when we initially talked about doing the podcast on A Sea of Barbed Wire, it didn't seem to me that you knew necessarily that you were going to follow up with Freedom on the Morning Tide, which probably didn't even have a title at that point. When did you finally decide that you were going to go into it, at least a second novel?
Actually, I must confess, A Sea of Barbed Wire was becoming longer and longer, and I had to decide where to break it off and end the book. So, in fact, I had probably several chapters of Freedom on the Morning Tide as part of Sea of Barbed Wire, but I decided this is going on too long.
Yes, I see now. So really, you had to find a sort of arbitrary point where to cut off and then recommence.
Well, there was not so much arbitrary. There was quite a convenient place where it could feasibly end and perhaps leave a sort of cliffhanger as well.
And I'm interested in the fact that you do recommence in February 1945. So we've got a 3-year hiatus.
Yes.
But obviously you need to bridge that sort of time gap. So there must be a degree in Freedom on the Morning Tide of retrospection, looking back and explaining how the characters left off in one book and then recommence in the next, because we're not talking about it being the next week. 3 weeks was a long time. It's more than half the time that the occupation lasted.
I did throughout Freedom on the Morning Tide, because it's a sequel, and because I was aware that some people might read it without having read A Sea of Barbed Wire first. I did make several references to what was going on historically, but also what had happened in the previous book by way of memories and recollections and looking back. So I believe, really, that Freedom on the Morning Tide could be appreciated as a novel in itself. But obviously, with reading A Sea of Barbed Wire first, it would make more sense. Yeah.
Yes, and that's why before we came on air, I said to you, if it had been me and I heard about the second book, I'd certainly want to read the first book first. Yes. I mean, that's only natural. But I take your point that both of them could be seen as standalone novels. But what I'm also interested in is it's all very well living here, as you know, Theresa, but you can't just decide to write a book about the occupation without doing a lot of research, which I know that you've done. But of course, you then now presumably had to re-embark on another research pattern in order to research the events that were leading up to the liberation.
Yes, that's right. Yes. I mean, fortunately, the island is rich with diaries and books about what happened during the occupation. The Priaulx Library is crammed with fantastic reference books, and so is the Guernsey. And I took various sources in research. It's a matter of osmosis, really. You're reading and reading and reading, and you don't really know what you're taking in. But it becomes lodged in your head.
Yes, it becomes clear. And of course, I'm very intrigued about this notion that in a way, A Sea of Barbed Wire, you sort of had to row back a bit, and then let's say a chunk, if I could put it that way, is the starting point of the next book. So you're beginning to see where your plot is taking you with the same people. Further, and of course introducing new characters, taking you further and further away from beyond the liberation point, because both of the novels they're about the occupation and the time span of the occupation, but in reality you've chosen, which is I find very interesting, you've chosen two relatively short bursts of time, haven't you? With A Sea of Barbed Wire, we're talking about the events being all within 1942. Yes. And then with Freedom on the Morning Tide, February 1940, up to February 46. Now, I'm going to say crammed a lot in, but it deals with a lot. Yes. And so we don't just stop with the liberation. We go on into this period afterwards. Could you tell us a little bit about how you got interested in the period immediately after the liberation?
I suppose I imagine myself in this situation with, half the population had evacuated and they were starting to pour back in. Some of them would find their houses severely damaged. Some would find their furniture missing. There was all kinds of things going on, and it wasn't an easy time. And it really fires the imagination of any novelist, I think, to imagine what it was like. So I looked into that. And I found that research for after the liberation isn't so easily available.
No, that's what I wanted to ask you, because many of the diaries finished pretty much in May 1945.
Yes,
There's lots and lots of information, and then suddenly it all stops.
If only Reverend Ord had carried on.
and life carried on. And in retrospect, these are people's lives, but still, to us, those of us interested in history, that we go from a period of time that is heavily documented into a really, really interesting time that the documentation itself seems to just suddenly stop. So where did you go to for this information? Because we are clear on Islands at War, Nick and I, that we go to the archives, but the diaries are great pointers for us.
Yes.
So I've described a project that I'm working on at the moment, and I'm going to have to look into this period with regard to my family. Where did you source a lot of the information in that initial post-war period?
I think in the Prio Library you can look at the old Guernsey presses and things like that, and that was very good. Other than that, it's just various diaries. It's hard for me to remember where I got it all from.
Well, that period is full of, the characters are all very, very worried. I know that in my family's case, Grandad came over on leave within weeks of the liberation, but he had to go back. And of course, it was all about being demobbed. And so if we look at we talk about people coming back to the island, but of course, those are split into different groups, aren't they? There's the servicemen that are obviously dying to come back. Some are able to come back on leave, but the ones fighting in the east still, they wouldn't have been able. So there was a longer period of waiting for them to come back. Yeah. Then, of course, you're right. If we look at the small children that went away, they're coming back as 5 years older, and some of the children that went are coming back as adolescents and grown-ups.
Yes.
So it's a movable feast as to
that's right.
These people are in various stages of their lives, having had enormous challenges to their lives, especially the men fighting.
Yes.
And then, of course, we've got people coming back and they've lost people that were evacuated to the UK that may have died. And then, of course, some ladies that went away were evacuated but pregnant. So it was... did you find in your research that people, how long did it take people generally to come back to the islands?
Well, they certainly didn't come back straight away, and they weren't allowed to come back until the island was made safe. For instance, the beaches were still mined. They kept back quite a few Germans as labourers, really, to remove the mines, to dispose of the weaponry, and they dumped a lot at sea, a lot of armaments out at sea, which must be still there.
So I can well, yes, they did. They dumped a lot of munitions in a sea trench off the coast of Alderney. Yes, without much thought to the future, I don't think. But
so the whole role was reversed. The Germans who were in charge, but now the prisoners being actually supervised to work very hard. Yes.
Okay, so we move towards Christmas 1945, and then we move towards the events leading up to February 1946, and we don't want to give spoilers away, but I have to ask you this: are you considering moving on to another volume?
Well, yes, I am. I've already started one, actually. I just can't resist it because I get these visions of what my characters are doing next. And so yes, it's broadening out because Lucas, the Polish prisoner, always talked about his family back on the farm in Poland, how his sister was attacked by the Nazis and how his mother was left and how his father was shot and left on the field. And after the war, Lucas is in Devon and he's thinking about how he can find his family again. He's also thinking about Ellie, of course.
Can I just ask why is he in? Can you explain why he's in Devon?
Well, he escaped. He escaped just before Christmas with Jack, a farmer friend, Jack, and they pretend to be fishermen, and they escape to the south coast of England, and they go to stay with Jack's brother on his farm in Devon, and the farm there support them. Lucas works to help with his keep throughout the rest of the war, and
so it's evident that the book itself, or the sequence itself, so I'm going to call it a novel sequence now, is not confined to the Channel Islands, is it? The action radiates out into the UK and into the continent as well. It does,
actually, as is the case with family members here now. You know, there were the relations and the extended family. So the novel starts to expand out to England and to France. And I'm exploring that more in the third book, where the families expand, and the pivot of them is Guernsey, and the main scenes will be in Guernsey, but we do pick up the lives of the families in France and in England. Yeah.
Do you have any idea at the moment where, in terms of a time period, that the novel sequence will end? What would the natural lifespan of
I must confess I haven't, Keith. I've no idea.
Well, looking at my own family, you know, my grandparents, they lived on into the 1980s. So there comes a natural break, doesn't there? Where, yes. Unless, of course, you go through with all the children and everything. I asked you if you would kindly read a passage, and I think
yes.
and I'm glad you've chosen something right. because you know what you want to, or what you don't want to reveal. So could I just ask you to run through that? Teresa's
yes.
just changing her glasses now. So
yes, I'd like to read this, which gives you a picture of how the novel is expanding out into the wider community. And this takes place in spring 1946. And it's Lucas, the Polish prisoner, if you remember from the first book. He has finally been able to track down his family, his sister and his mother, to France, because they managed to escape from Poland, and they travelled throughout Europe, hidden by different communities within the church secretly. The Catholic Church were quite good at hiding people, refugees, and people were travelling on the road from place to place, searching for food and searching for safety, actually. So, this is spring 1946. Leaving Saint-Malo on the coast of France in the roughest of weather, the steamer was forging its way through the heaving waves in the early hours of the morning. Irena's knuckles were blue with cold. She gripped the sides of the ship as the very floor lifted and sank beneath her feet, taking her stomach with it as it rose, before plunging again towards the depths. Her young son, Thomas, was clinging to her skirt, wailing but hardly making himself heard, while the heavy sea foam and spray rained down on the small family in freezing droplets. Her mother Anna sat wrapped in a voluminous black shawl which served to cover all but her small face. Even so, her eyes were sharp. She was wide awake, as she constantly clicked her tongue in disapproval at her daughter's restlessness. "The girl is crazy," she muttered to Lucas, who sat beside his mother, his body sheltering her from the worst of the buffeting wind. "Don't lean so far over, Irena," Anna shouted suddenly, and frowned at her daughter, gripping her woolen scarf under her chin and bracing herself against the force of the wind. It was a storm under which no captain would normally have chosen to set sail. "Look at your sister. She still behaves like a child. And Thomas. Come to your grandmamma, Thomas," she called. But the child stared at her with dark, suspicious eyes and clung to his mother's skirt even more desperately. "I tried to see a little of the Paradise Island, Mamma." This was Irena calling to her mother, while still holding her thick hair out of her eyes and leaning precariously over the side of the ship. Paradise? God help us, the only time we'll find ourselves in paradise will be when the Lord takes us. Making a sign of the cross, she muttered, "She thinks she can see it already, when we still have such a long way to go. Where is the girl's sense? Has she no idea how far we have yet to travel?" Lucas, ignoring his mother's constant complaining, which had been her sole means of communication ever since they set off, strained to see a glimpse of the island from which he had so narrowly escaped. But all that lay ahead was a smouldering sea mist and relentless rain, which engulfed all sight of the horizon. The travellers were tired of journeying, tired of oppression, of crossing armed border controls. The war had lent its weight on Anna's stooping shoulders. Already she had a lifetime etched upon her face. Now Anna knew it was impossible for her family to return to their beleaguered homeland, Poland. The war was over, leaving behind a continent lying in ruins. Cities had been turned to rubble. Employment was scarce, even though there was so much work that needed to be done. There were no employers, no money, no chance of investment. What food there was available was poor and in short supply. But Anna was filled with hope for a new beginning, a new life that would erase the suffering of their past. The convent had been a safe haven for a long time, but they knew their time there was coming to an end, and they desperately needed somewhere to settle down. As they journeyed on, the wind gradually died down and the skies cleared. Land came into view, and there was no mistaking Irena's excitement as she shouted to the others, "Look, Mamma, come and see, it's there, it's there." The ship's engine quietened as the vessel prepared to dock. Lucas strained his eyes to see a crowd of people gathered there, and his pulse quickened, as he feared after all they might be soldiers. But immediately the colourful clothes revealed a more friendly reception.
Yeah, very good, very good. And of course, I admire you radiating the story out into Europe in the post-war period. I mean, that's. I think the strength of the characters are going to carry you through that, or have in this book, and then into the third that you're fully intent on publishing. So
Thank you, Keith.
we don't want to get too much ahead of ourselves, but when might that be published?
Well, I'm hoping for, let's say spring next year.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah. I think you've got a lot of research to do, but
yes.
I can, myself and Nick would highly recommend that you get stuck into the first two volumes now, even though you know that there's a third on the way. Get the first two read, get used to read them twice, get used to the characters. It's a little bit cheesy to say they're lovable characters, but they're the characters that are, the way you've written it, they're very easy to get to know. People that listen to the podcast are obviously interested in the affairs that went on in the island. This current affairs month by month, but also the interaction between the military and the civilian authorities. Now, you do talk about actual people within the book, for example, like Hofmeier and von Schmetter, who were higher ranking, very senior ranking officers here, governors really, during the war. So
yes, I like to interject some fact into it to give it perspective and to let people know what was going on.
Yes,
really.
Yes, that's right. Okay, well, look, I'm so pleased that you you had time to come in today.
Oh, I'm really delighted to be here.
Well, I'm so pleased as well to hear that there's another book in the pipeline, because my wife is just finishing off some books my daughter sent her, and her next book is going to be A Sea of Barbed Wire, and then she was saying, will it go on after that? Because I think she's putting time aside to read both the books. So yes, thank you so much for.
Oh, thank you, Keith.
No, not at all. And how can people get hold of the book?
Oh, they're available locally in the bookshops, and they're all available on Amazon, so in paperback and in Kindle in the ebook.
Okay, so if anybody has a problem getting hold of the book and wants to know more, you can get hold of me at keith@occupied.com, keith@occupied.com, and we will look forward to hearing from readers and listeners to the podcast. So it just leaves me to say thank you ever so much for coming in.
Oh, thank you, Keith.
And of course, you'll keep us posted on how the third in the sequence go. And we'll look forward to having you on this time next year.
Oh, yes. Let's look for that.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll just play out with a little bit of Jim Delbridge.
The engines hum, a sky full of planes and each one with a bomb, and they're gonna wanna drop them on someone.